It is 7 p.m., Wednesday, September 4th, 2019. This is a public hearing of the Town of Speedway Board of Zoning Appeals. I am Mike Simonson, Chairman of the Board. Board members in attendance tonight are Mike Allen, our Vice Chairman, Tyler Carmichael, our Secretary, Janet Fullen, and Steve Jones, members of the Board. Also in attendance is Tim Ramian, our Recording Secretary, and Bob Clutter, the Town Attorney. Representing the Indianapolis Department of Metropolitan Development is Ms. Kathleen Blackham. Have all who wish to speak been sworn in?
Yes, they have.
Thank you. Would all please mute or turn off any cell phones at this time? Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Rules for those who wish to speak this evening. The petitioner, remonstrator, or proponents will each have 15 minutes to present their evidence. We will then hear a report from Kathleen Blackham. After her report, there will be a 5-minute rebuttal period. First order of business this evening is to approve the minutes from our previous meeting. Does anyone have any changes or additions to the minutes?
I do not.
Then they will stand as published. First petition this evening is a continued variance, 2019 UVS 002, 3970, 3780, and 4000 West 10th Street, Heritage Crystal Clean. Please state your name.
My name is John Smeltzer with the law firm of Scopolitas, Garvin, Light & Hanson, 10 West Market Street, representing Heritage Crystal Clean, LLC, in regard to two variances filed under case number 2019 UVS 002. Heritage Crystal Clean is requesting a variance of use and development standards to allow a flare structure to be constructed on the 4000 10th Street property on the north side of 10th Street and adjacent to Eagle Creek. We have a PowerPoint presentation for the board tonight, and we think we should address the issues raised in the last board meeting on the continuance, and Robert Shalhoub will address those issues regarding fluff. Does that make sense to the board?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Robert Shalhoub. I am the plant manager at Crystal Clean at 3970 West 10th Street. As John mentioned, I have a PowerPoint and I have a printed copy that I'll distribute.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
So for our agenda tonight, I'll be covering the first 7 items, and then John will finish up with the finding of facts. So a little bit about our history. We were formed in 1999 as Heritage Crystal Clean. Then in 2008, we became a public company and are currently traded on the New York Stock Exchange under HCCI. And currently the refinery has approximately 75 employees and has invested over $100 million at the site. Crystal Clean as a whole offers 4 services: parts cleaning, drum management, oil recovery, and vacuum services. The used oil that we collect under our oil recovery comes to the re-refinery at 10th Street, as well as the solvent that's used in our parts cleaning comes to the site as well to be recycled. Site history, in 1950 it was a Texaco packaging facility. Then in 1999, we as Crystal Clean leased the tank farm, some of the tank farm operations. And then in 2007, we installed our mineral spirits distillation column, which is used to recycle the mineral spirits in our parts washing program. And then the following year, we decided to purchase the site and begin the construction of the re-refinery. And that's where in 2012, we started making Group 2 base oil from used oil, and then we went through an expansion from 50 million gallons of used oil recycling to 75 million gallons in 2016. We do take a proactive approach to odors. We are very sensitive in the community. We send a contract security guard out 3 times a day throughout the neighborhood in the direction of the wind, and they fill out a form whether or not the units were running, whether there were maintenance activities going on at the facility, and whether they noticed any odors. If they do notice odors, they will contact operations. They'll do a site walk around, look for any activities that may be leading to odors, and then document that through our health and safety department. We also do, when a neighbor does call us, if our odor patrol doesn't pick it up, we do a full investigation. Again, same thing. We look around the site, we ask for time and go through the process to see if we can identify the cause of the odor. And then on the last bullet point there are cases, and you'll see on the next slide, where our own employees are sometimes not aware of odors because of wind direction and because where they're physically working. There has been cases where odors travel either north or east where an employee's not standing, which is why we do the 3 times a day active monitoring. In terms of odor control on our tank, the middle picture there is a pressure vacuum relief. So that is designed to let in air. And then the top right, the right-hand corner picture is a hose connected to you'll see some carbon canisters. So instead of venting to atmosphere, it'll vent through a series of carbon canisters that will remove the sulfur in the vapor space and then prevent odors from coming out of our tanks into the neighborhood. You'll see on the next slide the odor events by year. You can see the first few years after starting up the re-refinery, we had a significant amount of odors, and these are calls coming in from the neighbors. We've done many things upgrading our piping. We've increased our carbon canister usage throughout the plant as well as the replacement frequency. Then in 2015 and 16, we continue to improve our loading and unloading procedures, recognizing that we have some odorous material and making sure our carbon canisters are replaced. And then you can see 27, 18, and now this year we've had 3. So the 3 we've had this year is, again, carbon canister related. We loaded some vacuum gas oil, VGO, and we hadn't loaded it in many, many years. So when we looked at our loading procedure, we didn't reference odor control, so we've made those changes since. Vacuum pump, we had threaded connections. We ended up welding the pipe after the odor was observed, and that problem went away. And then more recently, we had a thermal well fail. We weren't expecting it to fail. It only lasted 7 years. We were expecting it to last at least 15, 20 years. So we're now in a proactive maintenance of replacing those every 3 years as opposed to waiting for the failure. An update on the bag house. Since we last met, we did restart the bag house in May with a lime injection system. We met with ITEM at the time in May to request a 6-month extension to demonstrate a 12-week cycle on their bag house, which they granted to November 3rd. Then by June, we scheduled our compliance test and passed and submitted the results to ITEM. And then by August, we made it through a complete 12-week cycle with the bag house operating. And following in that same month, ITEM was on site for a routine inspection. They went through that, and we also updated them on the bag house, noting that we submitted the compliance report as well as it made it through the 12-week cycle. So between May and even today, the bag house has been operating. But just 2 slides on our fire system. We do have 2 diesel pumps at 2,500 gallons a minute. We have a 1 million gallon storage tank of water with 5,000 gallons of foam. All our lines are pre-charged with foam. We have 10 monitors, alarm detection, auto notification, 3 automated process deluge systems, 2 warehouse sprinkler systems, 2 office lab pre-acting sprinkler systems, as well as an Accardo clean agent system used for our motor control system. We also have an emergency generator backup in the event of a power failure. We do have plant tours with the fire department. We also notify the fire department if we ever have to do any maintenance on our fire system. Automatically calls the fire department when the deluge goes off, and the fire department also assists us with refilling our SCBA's. Since we last met, we did put in our smart notice system into service. So this will notify the neighbors, employees, first responders if we're having a drill, if we have planned shutdowns, or if there is a plant emergency, and those are sent out via text, voicemails, or email, or a combination of either. And below are some examples of what notice we would send out to the community. The enclosed ground flare, you'll see a picture of the right of what it will look like. As we mentioned before, this is an $8 million investment for us, and it's designed to conceal the flame and also burn any process odors. We don't expect the noise level to be any different than it is today during either regular use or during an emergency. And as John mentioned, the variance is required for the height and the zoning. One last update before I give it back to John. We do have a public notice out with item. We are replacing a serpentine process heater with a more reliable heater, and that public notice is out right now with item. The emissions are not expected to increase, and this change will require another compliance test with this heater within 180 days of startup. Any questions for me?
So with the new bag house in operation, the fluff concern has essentially been eliminated?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
No.
Have you had any residents find or complaints since the bag house has been installed?
We met with some neighbors, and they had saw some fluff, some particulate, so we went out to look, and it was more of, what did you say? Cottonwood. So then we met with them, you just reoccur and just ask them, are they seeing anything, and we haven't seen or haven't heard from the neighbors in regards to seeing of any fluff since then.
Good.
When did you start with your security person going out 3 times a day?
2012.
Okay.
As soon as the beginning of that chart, we've been sending somebody out.
Okay. And when was your last inspection with the fire department?
I think
Was this year, or I think it was May or June,
May or June.
yeah, on the exact date, but it was this year, our annual inspection.
Right. And what did they say?
There was some we had some electrical issues as far as cords, that's about it.
Extension cords, yeah.
Extension cord usage, and we corrected those.
We'll have to bring him to the mic for this, because we can't hear this, yeah. You step out.
There was some electrical cord issues, that's what we found in the, our fire inspection that they had. Speedway came out.
And that's it?
I'd have to look at the report, but that was the majority of, there was a few issues like that, all electrical cords, daisy chained, a few things like that, that's, yeah.
Okay. And your inspections with them are how far? Just only annually?
They're annual with Speedway, yes.
Okay.
Can you state your name and address, please, for the record?
Andrew Burdette with the Health, Safety, Environmental Manager, Heritage Crystal Clean.
Thank you.
Any other questions in regard to the fluff issue?
I have none.
You good, Steve?
Yeah, I'm fine for now.
Okay, good. As shown on the plans filed, the flare structure will be connected to a pipe beginning at the main Heritage Crystal Clean facilities located at 3970 West 10th and ending at the flare structure located on the northern portion of the 4000 West property. The flare will be approximately 70 feet in height, and a new accessory building is being proposed on the same property as the flare facility. The variances requested are a variance of use and a variance of development standards regarding the maximum height. As discussed in the staff report, this 23.8 acre site is zoned SC2 and is surrounded by industrial uses to the north, east, and west, also zoned SC2. The comprehensive plan recommends heavy industry for this site. The staff supports these variances because they'll have minimal impact on the surrounding land uses, and previous variances have been granted for an 82-foot tall and 90-foot tall processing tower and a 96-foot tall heater stack on the HCC property. The flare itself will be located between the IPL substation and the railroad tracks to the north. The purpose of the flare is for safety in the event of a fire at the facility. Any gases or fumes fueling a fire will be sent from the processing facility through piping to the flare and will be burned off in the flare. It's important to remember the flare would only be utilized in the event of an emergency or maintenance at the processing facility. It's a state-of-the-art device in the industry and protects both the facility and the neighborhood. And this will not be a flare that you see at some facilities where a flame would be visible at all times. We prepared findings of fact and believe that the proposed flare structure will help protect the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the town, Speedway, its residents, visitors, and businesses. We do not feel that the value of adjacent property will be adversely affected because most of these properties are zoned SC2, and the use or value of the properties may actually be increased because it provides protection to those adjacent area. The need for the variance arises from a condition peculiar to the property and is not due to the general condition of the neighborhood. The existing use fits with other uses in the neighborhood in order to further protect the uses on the subject property and adjacent uses of variances needed. Finally, the strict application of the zoning ordinance constitutes an unusual and unnecessary hardship if applied to the property because the safety of the town, Speedway, should be the first priority. A strict application of the zoning ordinance would prohibit petitioner from being able to significantly increase the safety on-site and to adjacent property owners. Grant does not substantially interfere with the comprehensive plan because the comprehensive plan proposes heavy industrial use for the subject property. If you have any questions in regards to the flare itself, we have people here who will be pleased to answer any questions. And if there are no questions, we'd respectfully request that the variances be granted. Thanks for your attention. Any questions for me?
I have no questions.
No.
Janet?
No.
Thank you. Are there any remonstrators or proponents who wish to speak on this petition? Please step to the podium and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Edgar Crabtree. I live at 970 North McClure Street. That's just south of this plant. Earlier, they said they sent out people to check the north side and the east side for smell. Never has the south side ever been mentioned. This is one thing that, for the since they started this in 2015, they run 4 floors, knowing that they needed this bag house, but not waiting until this bag house was built and started. Now that the bag house is built and started, they have abundance amount of this fluff sitting on their property, and I was told they was trying to find an environmental place that would take it. But now, for 4 years, they just rode this stuff in the air. If everybody check out of that property there, of all them bags, well, just think, that's since May, when they said they got the bag house working. Also, they want to build this flare thing for the safety and the health of the neighborhood. Now, why wasn't this built at the time that this place started their business of refining their oil? That's what I'm trying to say. I don't know no answers to none of these questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'd like to have one more thing. Your history tells you about your future.
else who wishes to speak for or against this petition? Seeing none, we'll now hear from Ms. Blackham.
Good evening, Chairperson Simonson, members of the board. Kathleen Blackham with the Department of Metropolitan Development, 200 East Washington Street, room 1842. As you'll note, staff is recommending approval of this. Mr. Smeltzer has already talked about that. It does the comprehensive plan use for this property, recommends heavy industrial for the site. Now, in the entire area of Marion County, every parcel of land has a land use recommendation, and that's what the comprehensive plan is. And it, like I said, it recommends heavy industrial. There's also an overlay district, which is environmentally sensitive, and that's because it's in the 100-year floodplain portion of this property, which you probably already know. Again, staff is recommending approval of this flare structure. As Mr. Smeltzer previously indicated, there are other structures on the site that are taller than this, and so staff believes that it's not going to really have an impact on those surrounding properties, again, because it is surrounded by industrial uses. And with that, staff will be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
I have
Questions
none.
for Kathleen?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome, thank you. Now, have a rebuttal period if you'd like to speak to any of the concerns mentioned by
Just
the
briefly,
demonstrator.
it was asked why we didn't put the flare up when we started the facility. We've been working for over 3.5 years to acquire the adjacent property, a 13.1 acre facility, and we also had to work with IPL on their overhead power lines and get their permission. Once we acquired the property, we immediately started on the flare project. And that's just some background on why we couldn't have possibly done this. There has to be enough separation between the facility and the flare for it to be effective.
Entertain a motion to vote on this.
I'll make the motion for a vote.
I'll second it.
So we have a motion to vote on this petition, including any of the commitments already mentioned in the staff report.
That was a
regarding,
landscaping.
Landscaping, site plans, and other drawings.
Thank you.
Petition 2019 UVS 002 is approved, 5-0.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Next up on our docket is 2019 DBS 005, 2502, 2540, and 2610 North High School Road, and 6351 Debonair Road.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Elizabeth Bentz-Williams. I'm a land use planner with Clark Quinn Moses Scott and Gron at 320 North Meridian Street, Suite 1100, Indianapolis 46204. And with me tonight is Russell Brown, an attorney in our firm, representing the Town of Speedway Redevelopment Commission. regarding case number 2019 DVS 005. Tonight, we're here to request a number of variances concerning 26 acres at the northwest corner of Crawfordsville Road and High School Road. It's currently zoned CS with a small portion zoned C4. We appeared here last month before the Speedway Town Council, sitting as hearing examiner, to request rezoning of this acreage to a new commercial special district. The council unanimously approved the request, and then the town's approval was appealed by the staff of the Metropolitan Development Commission. However, with some amendments, the MDC approved this zoning this afternoon. The development is planned to be known as Founders Square. And under tab 1, you'll see a vicinity map. It's located at one of the gateways to the town of Speedway. And this site, and so the development and the details of the proposed site are extremely important to the town because of its placement. The town, your staff, and the developers for Founders Square have spent many months in planning and researching, which have culminated in the filing of the rezoning and these variance requests. I want to explain a little bit about the CS zoning. We oftentimes describe a CS because it's a commercial zoning, commercial special, and you have to list your uses and give a site plan and a plan of operation, much like a plan unit development for a residential property or a residential with a few commercial or other non-residential uses. The difference between the two is really that with a plan unit development, you create your own ordinance and your development standards. With a CS, you don't have that opportunity. You have to still meet all the development standards that go with CS. So even though it's a commercial special and we think of it as a tailored zoning specific to a piece of property, it still has to meet the same development standards as everything else. So it's not like we can create our own. So that's why we've identified these variances. And the goal of the pending rezoning and these variances is to create a development-ready site. Under tab 2, you'll see the site plan that we submitted. It's laid out to identify locations and layouts for anticipated uses. The preliminary plan provides for one large-scale use anticipated to be a medical facility. There are also various identified uses, including a hotel, grocery, and car wash. It's also important to note that this isn't an engineered site plan or a final site plan. Some uses on the site are existing and some may be relocated, which in turn will provide an opportunity for additional new uses along High School Road. There is an existing wireless communication facility on the site which will remain. The site is planned to have extensive landscaping and an opportunity to showcase the town of Speedway with proposed gateway features and signs which are detailed in the sign program. The entire thrust of this project is to upgrade the entry to the town of Speedway from the west to welcome and provide needed services for the community as well as travelers to the town. The development will have upgraded architectural standards and requirements fitting to reflect the heritage of the town of Speedway and the substantial investments the town continues to make within all sectors of the town's jurisdiction. I'd now like to address each variance request individually. Under tab 3, you'll find an exhibit that speaks to the front yard setback, the maximum 85 feet from the right-of-way. When Indy Rezone was adopted in April of 2016, it placed some new standards for development. You're probably used to hearing variances to reduce setbacks, but there are now also maximum setbacks that have to be met as well. Because the CS zoning allows for a mix of uses and superior and creative land planning, this standard doesn't always fit unusually shaped properties. The requested relief from the maximum 85 feet setback from the public street rights-of-way will allow for irregularly shaped parcels. The land is necessary, the variance is necessary because of the unique mix of uses and the operational needs for each of those being different. Some uses may be more like a campus setting, and therefore the maximum setback from the right-of-way may be difficult to achieve due to the shape and the amount of parking for the overall property. And then you have just the shape of the interior lots and then the existing improvements. I've placed some measurements on the site plan indicating setbacks from the right-of-way, which would exceed 85 feet. You'll see on the site plan that many of the lots can easily meet the requirement, but several proposed footprints can't come close. To meet the requirement on all sites within the development creates a practical difficulty, requiring the placement of parking for clients and customers of various uses in places that will be utilized for deliveries and emergency access. This is an example that the proposed form will relate to the function of the use. In other words, form follows function, and that should come first. Under tab 4, we have an exhibit that speaks to the front transitional yard request. The subject property is planned as an integrated development. However, there are existing uses that will remain. The affected area for this request for a reduction in the transitional yard is limited to High School Road north of 25th Street, and that's shown circled in red. This will allow the setbacks to match the new required setbacks south of that along both Crawfordsville Road and High School Road. There is a protected district across High School Road, across from north of 25th Street, which is what triggers that 20-foot transitional yard. That's a 5-lane road, and we feel that that would not provide a negative impact across the street, and it will provide a uniform and unified plan respecting the existing development and new development. The staff report indicates the amount of reduction of the requirement was not specified. The site plan in your packet is what was filed with the variance, and it was also mentioned in the narrative filed with the petition as well as the findings of fact. Under tab 5, we speak to the side and rear yard setbacks. In a CS zoning, all parcels are required to have a 10-foot setback between parcels on both the sides and the rears of the property. This request is relief from the requested setbacks on the interior lots only. And on your exhibit, I've highlighted in yellow all those interior lines, and you can see that that's because there's shared parking. And the site will be developed with seamless and cohesive design for signs and interior landscaping. The staff report indicates there would be burdens imposed on adjoining users. The only yards that we're addressing are the interior to the project, and we did have 2 pre-filing meetings to explain each of our variances requested and why we felt they were needed. Our next variance I'd like to discuss is the maximum building height, and there's no exhibit for that. But what we'd like to talk about is that this variance is to allow for flexibilities for uses such as a hotel or senior living where multiple stories require a height greater than 45 feet. We've amended our request to limit that height to 70 feet so that it's not an unlimited request. Without the variance, the ability to attract the quality and variety of users to the property could be compromised. A typical C4 zoning has a maximum height of 65 feet. Keep in mind, this is a 26-acre site adjacent to a major interstate interchange. We believe the height limitation of 70 feet, coupled with the requirements for additional approvals of each building elevation, including architecture and the materials, will ensure the safety and aesthetic quality of the development. The next variance, and the last variance I'm going to discuss, is transparency. And that you'll look at tab 6, please. This is also a new requirement in ND rezone. And the ordinance requires for new buildings that 40% of the wall surface between 3 and 8 feet be glass on any wall with a pedestrian entrance or any wall within 50 feet of the right-of-way. And that has to be two-way visibility, and it can reflect no more than 30% visible light. So this is for all uses in a CS district. We feel that to accommodate those, there will be uses that will accommodate those. But the lines on your exhibit speak to things like the rear line of a hotel, which is the proposed footprint there, and a thinner property like the northernmost lot along High School Road, where you would have two street frontages, and you have to accommodate loading, you have to accommodate parking and other things specific to each one of those uses. So we feel that it just doesn't always make sense. And the excellent development that is anticipated and desired needs to also function in accordance to the specific uses, and that will be considered in the design of each structure for the development. The last thing in your packet is the plan of operation. It's important in your deliberation of these requests that you consider the work your redevelopment staff and town manager have expended towards this high-profile project. This is not a carte blanche request for anything goes. Along with detailed list of uses that are prohibited, all development requires final site and landscape plan approvals be subject to the approval of the administrator of the Department of Metropolitan Development. Minor changes to the site plan, architectural reviews, building and sign elevations are subject to the approval of the Town of Speedway Redevelopment Commission. There's also an agreement between the SRC and the developer that gives them final control of all uses that are proposed within the development. So in closing, I would say that great care and attention has been involved in crafting this particular commercial special zoning district. For these reasons and the points that we have enumerated here, we would incorporate our materials and our findings of fact into the record and ask for your favorable recommendation of these 5 variance requests, subject to the plan of operation. And I am happy to answer any questions that you might have in addition.
First of all, I want to acknowledge that we received a request of a fee waiver from the SRC regarding the filing fees for this petition, and that was approved, and that will be placed in the record. Also, this is an unusual request for this board. As long as I've been on the board, every request that's come before me has been an individual request for a specific project, not a site plan or an approval for potential development. It's my understanding that what we're reviewing or considering is not an overall approval for the entire site, but they are very specific to potential projects within the site that would be approved by the SRC. Is that correct?
That's correct. Every use would have to be approved by the SRC, and then the variances, some of them are limited, like I said, to certain, the transitional yard to a certain area of the site plan. The height is for hotels or senior living. It's not that we're expecting to have uses that are shown on the site plan, such as a retail use that would have, unlimited height. Those would be your typical. Even the medical facility that was discussed, we didn't think would need more than the 45 feet.
And you mentioned the side, rear yard, transitional yards that were only on interior lots, but your diagram shows two of those being on perimeter parcels fronting Crawfordsville Road and High School Road.
If you look under Lot 5, they're perpendicular to High School and Crawfordsville Road, but they're not along those
Those are
roads.
perimeter lots. Those are not interior
Well,
lots.
I meant interior lot lines.
Okay. So in the uses listed in tab 7, is that a hard and fast list, or is there some room for changes to this list as interest may come or go?
The rezoning petition was advertised with all of these uses, and we did amend today and remove one use. The only way to get more permitted uses would be to file a petition and go back through the process, send new notice, and ask for a use to be added.
And which use was removed?
Gas station.
Gas station.
That doesn't mean that the existing gas station can't continue to operate there.
Okay.
They're just grandfathered.
They won't what? I'm sorry?
They can continue to operate there, but they couldn't move and a new gas station couldn't come in.
So you're saying that Circle K cannot move?
Under the current zoning, they would be legally non-conforming under the existing CS use because it's not listed as permitted use, but they could continue to operate where they are.
Because it wasn't the intent to have them move closer to the corner along Crawfordsville Road, but I believe there was some changes in regard to the watershed or
The wellfield protection.
the well field protection.
Yes, sir.
But you don't show the gas station on your plan.
It has a footprint that they were anticipating, but it's labeled potential or possible retail.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the petitioner?
Not at the moment.
Not currently.
No.
No. Thank you very much. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak for or against the current petition?
Good evening. Tim Gropp, Executive Director of the Speedway Redevelopment Commission. Thanks for hearing our petition this evening. I just wanted to reiterate, I've been with the town now for about 2.5 years, a little bit over that, and since I walked in, I've been working on this project and this development. It means a lot to this community, not only because it's a gateway, but as you're all very aware, we have very limited land left in Speedway to develop at this kind of scale. So it's important to us to both have continuing great development throughout the town, each development increasing a little bit more in its design standards and its quality. So the Redevelopment Commission has not taken this project lightly in any way. We've actually taken steps back to kind of reevaluate everything on this project, to look at what the uses are, and it really is a jigsaw puzzle in a lot of ways. So at the same time we're going through this process, we've been going through the bond approval process, we've been going through the rezone. We're also negotiating with existing property owners to try and do land swaps to try and accommodate people that don't want to be there. Some of them have worked out, some of them have not. So, and that goes with the site plan too. I really want to emphasize what's before you on the site plan is conceptual in many ways. to kind of give you an idea of what we're able to fit on there. That is not necessarily what the final one's going to look like. As was mentioned, we just this morning took out one user that was looking to be on the site plan, so we're gonna pivot on that one. What's important to remind everybody is that, you know, the roads in particular, the intersection that we're improving at 25th and High School are kind of where they need to be. So that's how these parcels are going to line up. Now, could some of them be a little bigger, a little bit smaller when we finally land our users? Possibly, absolutely. You know, if we don't get the medical user, we're going to have to rethink that back 10 acres. What we're trying to do is establish a development-ready site that allows us to have flexibility to move quickly, because once we take out that bond, we're on a clock. And we need to have these users that we've been talking to, as well as additional users that are within that list that we're recruiting, to be able to move quickly. So we have about over 1 million tons of dirt to have to move and spread out there. So, and then we have to put in new water main, new sewer main, and all new roads in that area, while coordinating removal of existing gas station and getting that ready, so that when we're done putting the new infrastructure in and all the sites are ready, we can have agreements signed with users to allow them to start building as soon as possible. So when that first bond payment is due, we're ready to go and we have users on site. So the amount of steps that we can take out of that to be able to not only negotiate with users that we want to see out there, but also to move as quickly as possible, get this development moving, is important to this development being successful. And as I mentioned, this is our last 25-plus acre development in this town unless we do a major redevelopment somewhere else, and which is always possible, but nothing slated at this point. So we want to make sure that we're maximizing the assessed value on this parcel and that we're creating enough density to have an impact on the community for years to come, and maximizing the value of this site. So, thank you. Happy to answer any questions on behalf of the Redevelopment Commission.
So,
Go ahead, Mike.
so the height request is specifically for a hotel.
A hotel possibly, you know, if the medical doesn't go, we might shift to senior living as a possibility back there, which could be, you know, 3, 4, or 5 stories. We haven't finalized that yet. I will tell you that when we had our public input sessions, as well as we did with our surveys of the community, that was something very high on the list. And I forgot to mention that one of the other things we're trying to do on this development, you know, it's not one big user that everyone will get totally excited about necessarily, but it hits a lot of those check boxes of things we heard the community wanted when we went out and asked the community. So the 70-foot would be equivalent of about a 6-story hotel. So, you know, the Wilshaw is a 5-story hotel. It's a little bit shorter than this one. So this would be
Similar
about
to what
6
the
foot.
courtyard.
Oh, yeah, just probably a story taller than the courtyard would be equivalent of what we're talking about in that.
It'd be a similar type of variance to what we approved for them.
Correct.
They could build a 4-story or 5-story, I forget what.
Correct. And up by the interstate, we think that's appropriate because, you know, you got bridges there and everything else, so I think it'll blend in very nicely. But that's why we restricted that language.
So basically, this request is to help streamline the build-out process to where once you have a potential investor or tenant wanting to locate within the development, hopefully all the ticky-tack variances are already been addressed, and they can potentially move forward more quickly than having to go through the process after the fact.
Essentially. So, you know, the least amount of hurdles we have to get to development, the better off we are to be able to negotiate for the users we want to see out there and get to market quicker. So and that is not to cut corners and have a poor development. It's to do it properly and efficiently. We know what the restrictions are based on the site plan that we're able to put together. So we know what these sites can be based on the infrastructure we have to put in. So therefore, looking at it, we know these are going to be variances that they're going to need. So we're going to go ahead and put them on the development now that they're able to utilize this as is, based on what we know is going to be a problem, to be able to move these to market quicker, absolutely.
And we have a developer in place for the entire site right now?
Yeah, Shelby Bowen is here with Rebar Development. He is representing HG Rebar Speedway LLC, which is the developer that is working with us on this development, and they have been working very hard, meeting with potential clients and users to try and find the best fits that make sense to this project.
And what control does the SRC have over the selection of the potential tenants or?
So ultimately, we have a final say in that. So obviously, we've put together the rezone package, and we worked on those uses, allowable uses and non-allowable uses, based on working with the developer, and also intent of, again, what we heard from the community didn't want and was open to seeing out there. So that's number one, is the actual rezone and the uses available. And then beyond that, there's I can't remember the exact name of it, but, well, there's the economic development agreement, thank you, Bob. And there's a purchase agreement and also a funding agreement that has stipulations in there that allow us to make sure we're getting what we want there. And then also the administrative approvals allow us, another part of this is there is a signage package that goes with this. So we're making sure we're watching every aspect. The SRC's goal is every new development to be a little bit nicer. So what happened on the south side is very nice. It's been very successful, but we think this one can be a little bit better. So that's our goal. Let's make this one a little bit better. Let's tighten up the signage package. Let's make sure that the building materials are a little bit nicer. And let's make sure that when people come to the Speedway, they're pretty impressed when they get up to that first stoplight, stop and look around and say, wow, this is a pretty nice community. This is our opportunity to do that.
You have some control over the actual location, too, of some of the potential?
Yeah, I mean, we're working day in, with all these users coming here. They're getting run through our office, and we're sitting down discussing the best uses, and we're involved in the overall development process. So this has not been the developer saying, here's what we're going to do. This is the developer talking to users, calling us up saying, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about this idea? And giving them feedback. At this point, we have nobody signed because we have to get the rezone done. We have to get some of these other puzzle pieces, as I mentioned, in place before we can go sign purchase agreements on parcels that don't exist yet, that we need, we'll divvy up these parcels based on the users we get and make it all fit. That's the key. But we needed to know what's happening with Circle K. We need to know how we're dealing with El Rodeo. We needed to know how the cell tower fits into everything first.
But as Mr. Simonson stated, this is an unusual request. And part of doing business and, expanding, say it is a hotel or medical facility, part of doing business is coming in front and asking for variance for use or height restrictions or whatever. To just give basically a blanket authorization, without any idea of what's coming in or how it's going to be located or situated on the property or anything.
I will say this must be an unusual request for the town Speedway. I came from 5.5 years up in Fishers, and this is how we did new developments. This is how you set up a development-ready pad, ready for development. So to me, the other process is a little unusual, but every town does things a little bit different. So that's why we're coming forward with this request now. But to have a development-ready pad that we can go out and market, because we don't know what's going to be the end user there. We have a pretty good list. We are talking to a lot of different potential users, but we haven't signed anything yet. So we're trying to get to that point.
To tie in with their comments and telling us what you can, obviously revealing only, what's the interest been like in this project? Gauging from, you list the potential uses all there. Does that seem likely you could fill those, or, do you guys feel confident in the ability to, once these variants would be approved, the bond's taken out, that you would have very strong interest in that project?
There's been very strong interest. I always caution that interest doesn't mean signing on the bottom line yet. So very strong interest. Shelby could probably step up here and tell you more, as he's been the direct contact with a lot of the leads. However, I would say there's several on that site plan that are very close to being ready to move forward once we have something to present to them. So right now, we don't even have the parcels ready to sell them yet. We're trying to get all our steps in place first. But I don't think we have any problem, at least getting the main pieces in place. You know, it might take a little bit longer to get some of the smaller outlots done. And frankly, we're probably willing to wait a little while if it's not the right user as well. We've kind of based our bond on a certain percentage of these developments moving forward, the ones that we felt most comfortable with, that they were close to the finish line if we can get through these approval processes.
But just to reaffirm, basically, the SRC has final say of what goes on this property?
Yes, correct.
10 years ago, or however long it's been since this process began with Main Street and others, are we in a better situation or a better position now where the interest has come to us, where we're not out, I don't want to say begging for development, but we're in a position where people are asking us to come here and we have the ability to pick and choose the better places for our area?
I think it absolutely is the answer, especially in a development like this. We've earned the right through investing a lot in our infrastructure, investing in new roads, investing in the roundabout, you know, making nicer buildings, in particular Main Street, that we are able to be a little more picky than we used to be. We can demand a little higher building than we used to be able to. So absolutely, and I think that's where we're at on this development. We're able to say no to people if we're really not comfortable with it, and that's okay. Again, we're trying to find the best user for the site. I would say there's probably some variance to that. We're not a strong office market, so I don't know that we can be overly picky if we built an office building out there. You know, we got to decide how long we'd want to carry something like that to find potential user. But specifically on retail, we can be a little more pickier. We've earned that right. We can build a little nicer building. We can demand a little bit more than we used to in the past.
So do you envision this being similarly built to like West Clay, or just a run-of-the-mill strip mall that you see?
Let's go a little in between there. West Clay might be a little on the extreme. I don't know that we need 100% brick buildings up there, but I think you take what's on the south side and improve that architecture a little bit, a little more stone, a little more brick aspect there, and just tighten it, signage package being a little bit different, and maximize the acreage you have and make it look as nice as you can. So we'll know a little bit better when we start seeing some architecture with some of the users as we sit down with them.
The SRC does have some ability to direct that architecture.
Yeah, I think it's built in here for the most part. I mean, a lot of what our rezone was focused on architecture. This is the snapshot, I would say. There's a much more in-depth, like I said, signage program, as well as percentages of this and that are included as well.
Tim, how long do you think this will take for it to be finished?
Great question.
From now.
Our goal is if we can get through this process and get through the funding agreement, which has kind of been held off because both sides didn't want to sign names to an agreement that we couldn't execute right away. So if all that is accomplished this month, we plan on getting bids back for earthwork and infrastructure by the beginning of October, most likely mobilizing in November. And we would like to be able to turn over sites to users by late spring, early summer of 2020. And if all possible, have several of those up and functional by the end of 2020, so they can be assessed 2021 for the 2022 taxing period. That's our goal. Sorry, I had to think that one through.
Other questions?
No.
No?
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks,
thank
Tim.
you.
Anyone else?
Hi, Gary Rakes, 5420 West 15th Street, also town councilor in Speedway. Just wanted to speak to a few of the points that have been mentioned this evening. The council has unanimously supported this entire process and including the rezone request. We have a lot of momentum going within the town. I think, Chairman, you asked a question of Tim a few moments ago. He could reference the last 2.5 years. I can reference the last 15 years. 15 years ago, we had an engineering company that was representing the town for 40 years that didn't want us to pay them to do work in the town in terms of redevelopment. Today, we have no less than a dozen engineering companies, law firms, other companies that want to be here and developing because of the things we've accomplished as a community. And it's been literally hundreds of people in the community that have been a part of that process. Not always in 100% agreement, but a lot of folks that have been absolutely supportive of that. And we have worked really hard as a community to do that. I think this is a great opportunity for us to make our gateway on the west side of our community much better. We've come a long way on the south side. That particular property did not used to be part of Speedway. We had to convince the city of Indianapolis to de-annex that so we could annex it in. And I think the community's done a really good job of putting something there that we can be proud of. It's bringing hundreds of visitors on a weekend to an athletic complex. It's bringing the potential for 300 people to stay in hotel rooms, use the restaurants and other things in that area. Those are the same kinds of things that can happen, not necessarily the sports piece, but the other things that were mentioned here. And I think that's what we've been trying to do for 15 to 20 years. And we've seen it come out of the ground on Main Street and in this area that we're talking about. We've seen even the shopping center that's been able to attract investment of retailers that are the successful retailers today. Not the big box retailers, but the discount retailers that are actually profitable. And I think that's the key, is we have profitable companies coming to Speedway wanting to be in Speedway because they see the successes we're having. And that's important to our residents so that they can maximize their housing values, and we've all seen those increase. So all these things work together, in my opinion. I think there's some really interesting points that were made about setbacks and transparency, and I'm not technical, so I'm not going to say any more words than that in terms of what setbacks and transparency is. But I do believe that we have a finite amount of space in our town of developable land. Redevelopable land is more of what we work with on Main Street. This is actually developable because we spent millions of dollars buying property, improving that property to the point where we have a piece of property, 25 or so acres, that we can actually hand to a developer in a partnership that we still maintain a lot of control of, and I think that's important. And it's going to give us the opportunity to continue to improve up High School Road, along Crawfordsville Road, and that's what we've been trying to have the opportunity to do. So I think that's another important point. I think the other thing I would do is mention that if we compare that piece of property to other areas around the city of Indianapolis, we're not Park 100, we're not Park Fletcher, we're certainly more urban. And so we have that, with that finite space, we can't have the setbacks, we can't have some of those things that some of those bigger parks can have. So we need to maximize that space as best we can. I think the things that have been recommended here are good. At the same time, I think they're suitable, and we've been respectful and responsible in the things that we've done to this point over the last 15 years. And I think the Redevelopment Commission will continue to do that. And I know as a counselor, I'm not speaking for the full council, I'm speaking for myself. I think the council will also hold the standard to that. So with that, I just encourage you to support this, and would be happy to answer questions if you have any.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Good evening, Chairman. Shelby Bowen, President of Rebar Development, 8700 North Street, Fishers, Indiana, 46038. First of all, thank you for the opportunity. Believe it or not, we've been working on this about 18 months with the town. And I'll say, I think one of the reasons that the town selected our partnership with Rebar and Hageman is 100% of the projects that I've been involved in since 2004 have been public-private partnerships. Every single project I've done has been a collaboration with the community, both in the private sector, and then I worked in the public sector for a short time. And really, this project's been driven by the town of Speedway. And if you look out there today, you know, it doesn't look like you can create a really beautiful pad-ready commercial development. But over the past year and a half, through bringing together engineering teams and architects and civil engineers and environmental engineers, traffic engineers, I think we're now finally to a point where we're ready to move forward with the town. A lot of the things that the town has built into the agreements, which we're comfortable with because we believe in the project and want to be proud of the end result. But I'll give you one example is in the purchase agreement, which we could execute pending, you know, all of the necessary approvals. The town has asked us to include in that purchase agreement that they get to approve the franchise. And, you know, that's just something that, as simple as it may sound, is important, as you all understand, having seen a variety of different hotel uses over the years. And so even just that element of what hotel brand is going to be potentially on the site is up to the town to accept or not. And then everything from architecture of the building, landscape architecture, use, really ultimately we're deferring to the town of Speedway in those discussions, and we're saying here's what we think is commercially viable and here's your vision and how can we align that. As far as the question about whether or not we think there's demand, we have not yet marketed the site at all and have multiple end users that are ready to execute, I think, purchase agreements. We have letters of intent. We've turned down multiple uses that weren't consistent with the original desires for the town on the uses. And so, in my opinion, the town is really getting what they sought to do, and that's listen to what the people had asked us to go see if that was achievable. And I think we've had some success to date at maybe plugging in those types of end users. And I'm wholly comfortable sitting in front of you saying that ultimately the town of Speedway is going to say yes or no on what comes and what doesn't.
You just said you have not marketed the site, yet you've had people seek
That's
you
right.
out
Correct.
to potentially locate here, so they...
Yeah, even before now, I think we have a sign up. I think, Tim, do we have a sign out there now?
signs up now.
But this is, we've had, I'd say starting 6-7 months ago, probably folks reaching out to us specifically. And then as we started circulating that potential site plan, you know, they're going, hey, I'd like to be here, and the town saying maybe here, and so it's really been a collaboration. But yeah, we've had people reach out to us without any marketing to date.
Real quick, can you simplify what is pad ready? Is that...
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, utilities in place, roads in place, and graded so that a developer, end user, so we're just really master developing. We're a conduit to execute on the town's vision. Ultimately, we'll sell the pad graded, and they'll come in and just build the end use.
Say graded, just rough graded?
That's right.
Okay.
Within 12-inch elevation of what they want.
It's a lot of earth to move.
It's a lot of earth, and it took a lot of engineering to figure it all out, but I'm really excited about, because, you know, there's the pond and elevation of the roads and the back versus the front, but everybody's really excited about kind of where we've landed on that.
Any other questions? Good. Thank you, Shelby.
Thank you.
Anyone else who wishes to speak for or against the petition?
Good evening. My name is Jacob Blaisdell. I'm the town manager of Speedway and a Speedway resident. Just want to reiterate that Tim and I have worked very hard throughout this process to listen to the community and the uses that the community wants and would like to put in this area. Some of it has been from an organized process. Some of it are people that just stop by our office and really want to tell us that they want this particular use or that particular type of use. So we're excited about bringing these in. And then just on some of the comments as far as the variance that's being requested, we're trying to make this area as attractive as possible so that we can get the best and highest uses possible. Something that hasn't come up tonight is we also worked very hard to get this area designated as an opportunity zone, so it is part of an opportunity zone tract. And then, of course, also we're trying to make it developer-friendly as far as having some of these zoning variances together, and so we can present the strongest package that we can and get these projects that the community is really looking for. And we would appreciate your support and help in doing that. Questions? Great. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Anybody else? Next, we'll hear from Kathleen Blackham.
Kathleen Blackham with the Department of Metropolitan Development. Staff is recommending denial of these 5 variances. And just an overall comment, the reason why staff is recommending denial is because there's lack of detail. The first request, or the first variance, talks about the 85 maximum setback, 85-foot maximum setback. Again, no details are provided, and without having to actually evaluate and review the specific site, it's really difficult to say whether that would be appropriate. When you get to the transitional yard, staff believes that there should be a 20-foot transitional yard there along High School Road, because it's across the street. You have a protected district, a dwelling district, but there may be a situation where it is not, it's not possible, but without more information, again, it's very difficult to evaluate. Side yards, the same thing, side and rear yards, the 10 feet's required, so it may be something less than that. When you start getting into narrowing that area, then you're starting into maybe compromising the ability of emergency vehicles to properly get in there and respond to any emergency. Maximum height of the building, staff has frequently supported heights that go beyond what is permitted in a particular district. But again, it depends upon the architecture, the use, and that has not really been provided. Again, we're talking about lack of detail. When it comes to reduced transparency, that relates directly to public safety and visibility. And that's why it's in the new zoning ordinance. Staff has supported reduced transparency in situations, but it depends upon the floor plan, what is actually behind that wall, and, for example, a kitchen where there be equipment or restrooms where you would not need to have, or you shouldn't have that transparency. But again, without something more to review and evaluate, staff doesn't believe it would be appropriate to support these variances. When variances are requested, again, they give a detailed site plan. There are elevations, and they're drawn to scale. None of this has been submitted. The concept plan that has been provided talks about potential and possible, but there's nothing that is definite. Now, there are situations where we would probably support some of these variances, but again, without more information, staff doesn't feel comfortable in recommending approval of these variances. Staff also believes that this is a blank site with the exception of the wireless cell tower, the gas station, and the restaurant. And in that regard, staff believes that there really isn't a practical difficulty in the use of the site. It could still be used commercially, and staff doesn't believe that, as this is proposed, that it does meet those qualifications in terms of the practical difficulty and the use of the site. Staff doesn't believe that the development that has occurred on the south side has been hindered by having to come before the board, and I know there have been height variances and there have been some other variances related to that development. Staff is not aware of any heavier burdens that's been placed on the developers. And again, staff is recommending denial of all the requested variances and would be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
The transitional yard along High School Road, the existing properties, buildings there do not have that 20-foot transitional yard currently.
That is correct.
Has that been something that's been updated or changed? Is that part of the 2016 zoning change?
No. Those buildings that already exist, actually, they, for lack of a better phrase, they're grandfathered in. But when new development comes in, still that would require a 20-foot transitional yard setback next to a protected district.
And the transitional yard would have to be a landscaped
Yes.
area, not a parking lot?
Not a parking lot, not a building.
Not a building, okay.
Under the ordinance, the new ordinance, parking lots are considered structures, and so you could not have that in, parking lots could not be in that transitional yard.
Oh, and they mentioned in their presentation that the side and rear yards would be paved common parking lots.
And that information wasn't provided to staff. This is the first time staff has
First time
ever
you've
heard
heard
that.
that? Now, if that were the case, is that,
But again, you don't know if that would be something that would probably be supported, but without more details and a scale drawing, it's really difficult to evaluate that and to review it.
Sure. Any other questions for Ms. Blackham?
No.
Like you're thinking, Steve?
Parking.
You good?
I'll have a question for Tim.
All right, thank you.
Whenever he comes back up.
Yes, sir.
Tim, let's just say that this proposed rental and office next to the restaurant, okay, that building that you have drawn on here.
Okay.
If that building changes in size or whatever, who has a say about parking and issues like that?
Parking is dictated by the I'm trying to get my language correct, by the zoning ordinance through Indianapolis. So whatever the size of the building is.
So Kathleen would have something to do with that?
Correct, and I believe, yeah, I'm actually going to pass this one over
Okay.
to the
That's all
zoning
right.
experts on that.
For the record, my name is Russell Brown. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Clark Quinn, Moses, Scott & Gron, 320 North Meridian Street, Suite 1100. So, as proposed under the plan of operation, there's a variety of approvals that would be required. So site plan approval would be subject to administrative review. So planning, DMD would have, the administrator would have that opportunity. You still have permitting requirements, so you'd still have to go through any permitting requirements just like you would for any proposed development. So those aren't just, hey, we get to have 8 by 16 parking spaces. They would still have to comply with the size. They would still have to be reviewed for turn radiuses, for all of those requirements that exist in the ordinance that we're not asking for variances for. That still has to go through an approval process there. Did that answer your question?
Okay. Yeah, Kathleen, do you agree with that? I want to hear you tell me.
Well, there is a level of approval, administrator's approval, that is correct. But once you approve these variances, it's going to be difficult for the administrator to say, no, you can't do this. And I'm trying to think of some example, and
Sure.
I can't off the top of my head, but because those variances are in place, it's going to be very difficult if they come forward with a development that meets one of these variances and that needs one of these variances to say, no, you can't do that. That's what staff is concerned about, is that without having a site plan, building, elevations, and exactly what is going on, it is very difficult. And yes, even other CS requires administrative approval, so that's part of the CS district. Whenever a parcel is zoned CS, it does require administrative approval. So that, this one is no different than any other. The only difference here is that you're opening the door for a bunch of variances that have already been approved, and it's going to be difficult for that administrator, whoever reviews that, to say, no, you can't do that.
They made reference that other large-scale projects have gone through this similar variance process without having defined occupants, tenants, buildings to go on site. Is that something you've encountered through DMD or?
Yes, but again, you don't have, if they need variances, because as Ms. Williams had indicated, there are some development standards associated with the CS district, and if you can't meet those standards, then you apply for a variance of development standards, or then you get that reviewed, and in terms of reviewing, you look at if in fact there is a practical difficulty in the use of the site. So this is an unusual, as has been mentioned, this is an unusual request, because as far as staff is concerned, it opens up the door, and it makes it really difficult when it comes to administrative approval.
So even with the limited uses permitted and the oversight from the SRC,
Well,
it's still too much of an open book?
Well, staff believes that it is, yes.
Okay.
And there have been, there have been 2 or 3 CS rezonings that have been approved, and there have been conceptual site plans, and staff understands that when the final, there has to be an approval by the final staff or site plan, and when they start pulling permits, then they will have to get administrative approval for those particular uses in those particular buildings. But again, if you run into a situation where they need a variance, then that allows a more closer review of those.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Petitioner have anything else to add?
Yeah, I was going to use my rebuttal time, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman. I'll provide one clarifying point. The question asked about those existing buildings along High School Road and whether they had to comply with a transitional yard. Under the old ordinance, when you had an arterial street, that exempted out the requirement for a transitional yard of that size. So this is a new, it's not new overall, but it is a new requirement that comes as a result of any rezone, and that transitional yard does have some different requirements under any rezone than it did under previous iterations. So I wanted to clarify that. In addition to being an attorney with Clark Quinn, where I've been for 12 years, while in law school, sat in your spot. I sat as a member of an excluded city board of zoning appeals in the city of Lawrence, where I live. I currently sit as a Fort Harrison Reuse Authority board member, where we're chasing some of the same dreams and visions that your redevelopment commission is. So I'm excited to be here as representing a very progressive and proactive redevelopment commission. I hope you understand how that is, and that you have something great going on in the town. As has been mentioned multiple times here, the goal here is to have a shovel-ready or development-ready site We believe that increases opportunities for development, increases flexibility when chasing those users, especially when you have regional or national users. You will often get in the business of, hey, we need to build X number of stores or X number of restaurants next year. Do you have something ready to go that we can close on quick and be under construction in X amount of time? That happens. You get a call, I need a site in this market in these days, and that is a very short turnaround and presents opportunities that might get you something you might not otherwise be competitive for. A shovel-ready site decreases the delay in moving projects for proposal and increases that speed to a shovel in the ground, and it quite frankly increases your reputation as a developer-friendly community, which we believe is the goal of the Redevelopment Commission. Staff has mentioned in their staff report why these variances are not necessary, because this is a blank site. Obviously, the development team has a very different view of that. Not all undeveloped sites are the same, are not all created the same. Non-perpendicular street frontages, existing uses which must be remained and designed around, desire to be reactive to the market, varying sizes of parcels. All of those are things that all require variances in a blank site setting. And we believe those are present here and do create some of the practical difficulty that the staff report indicates is not present. These are all factors which we believe would warrant your approval of tonight's petition. And we do not believe that this creates, this request for flexibility creates the wild, wild west. It is not, these are limited, we believe, in nature, limited in scope, and limited in applicability to those which we believe are necessary to allow for reactive to the market, and probably will be applicable on multiple parcels throughout the development. If we thought it was only likely going to be applicable to one parcel, it might be something that comes back and needs to be addressed at that time. But those side and rear yard internal lines, that 10-yard, that creates a 20-foot buffer between parking lots. If you're trying to create multiple use parking areas, which is the goal here, to have shared parking to decrease the amount of parking spaces. You don't build every lot for Christmas Day. How do we do that? Shared parking is the way that you can do that. And having a 20-foot required space between dead space there doesn't facilitate that. And that's going to be something that goes throughout, believe goes throughout this development. Having an internal street, we believe, which will be necessary to run all those utilities that Tim's going to spend all of that taxpayer dollar putting in, which is necessary to make these pad-ready sites, creates some practical difficulty. Having street frontages, having a hotel that's going to have potentially 2 street frontages, that's an issue for transparency and for some of those things. But again, being ready when that hotel developer comes, I can tell you from personal experience, when that hotel developer has money and capital raised, if a project falls through across town, they're looking for a replacement site. They've got folks who need money. Having an opportunity zone creates a lot of opportunities that allows you, when you have a flexible, ready site to go, allows you to spring and get something that you might otherwise miss out on. We believe that having these variances in place, having the CS that's in place, having the review that's in place in that CS, and then having the agreements between the Redevelopment Commission and the end developer in place allow for this to be reactive, but also allow for very meaningful back and forth between the developer and the town. That doesn't have to occur once every a month when you have your BZA meeting, or it doesn't have to occur on those very set schedules, but can react to the market. That's nimble, and we think that's important to allow for the success of this project. We think these are limited in scope, and we do think there's a practical difficulty as it relates to bringing this to market, bringing it ready to market, so that a very aggressive timetable that Tim laid out can be met. So you can have new tax dollars coming in in 2022 to pay back those bonds that are being ready to be issued. We would ask tonight that you consider voting on each of these 5 variances separately, voting on each one up or down. That would be our request. Obviously, that's subject to the will of the board, but other than that, happy to answer any questions that the board has. Otherwise, we thank you for your attention tonight.
Yes or no?
Yep.
So, the only question or comment I have is, there's a submitted plan of operation in the packet that was handed to us that basically details the permitted uses, not the prohibited uses, and some of the other details for the administration, and I would like to add that as a commitment to the variances, that this be adhered to as submitted to us this evening.
That's great, and this is also the rezoning approval made today is subject to the same plan of operation, so that's completely, we think that's completely appropriate.
Okay. Any questions?
No. I would make a motion to vote on 2019 DVS 005.
I will second that.
And please remember, we're voting on each one individually. The ballot has them listed 1 through 5, so.
Right. Yeah, make sure you identify yes or no next to each number. Petition 2019 DVS 005, variances 1 through 1 through 4 are approved 5-0. A petition, variance number 5 is approved 4-1.
Thank you all. Welcome, thank you.
All right. Don't make me regret it.
Next up, we have 2019 DBS 006, 1555 Main Street and 1010 Polk Street.
Wait, which one are we at? Oh, I forgot about the Polka Street.
Thank you.
Good evening. Again, I'm Elizabeth Bentz-Williams. I'm a land use planner with Clark Quinn, Moses, Scott, and Grahn, representing the Town of Speedway Redevelopment Commission in case number 2019 DVS 006. And in this case, we are requesting variances to provide for an 8-foot fence on the property line without a landscape buffer. This property is bordered on the south side by 10th Street. It's bordered on the east side by Poco and on the west by Allison Way. It includes an open area and then some treed and brushed area that's part of a cleanup between Praxair Surface Technologies and the Town of Speedway Redevelopment Commission. And due to previous contamination, the site is required by IDEM to be fenced. And there are many requirements and details about how that can be done and the where the fence has to be, the height of the fence, and then also what can and cannot be planted. So all of these things, including the fact that only natural grasses are allowed to be planted, requires the need for the variances that we're asking. In the handout that I gave you, the second page is an aerial of the site, and it shows you the contaminated areas in the yellow, and the red line surrounding that is the proposed fence that we're talking about, and then it ties into an existing fence on both sides that's already there. And then the next page is a picture of the fence itself. The IDEM would only require actually a black vinyl or chain link fence. They have upgraded this to match what's already on Main Street and to have a much better look for the visibility of that corner. And then the final thing that in your packet is just the findings of fact, because we do feel like the practical difficulty is that in order to mitigate and contain the contaminated site for the health and welfare of the community, we need these variances to make that happen. So for those reasons, we're asking to incorporate our findings into the record, and we would ask for your favorable recommendation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
The entire perimeter of the site shown in the red line will have this style of fence on it?
Mm-hmm.
And who currently owns the site? The town? Or
The town owns the majority, and Union Carbide owns, where the actual fence is, the town owns, but then Union Carbide also owns.
So that dirt's never going to go away, it's just going to sit there? I'm sorry if that's too obvious of a question.
No, Tim Gropp, Executive Director, Speedway Redevelopment Commission. Yeah, so this situation is another one that we've been dealing with for years. It's an unfortunate situation where a small parcel of land was purchased to straighten out Polko back in 2010 or 12. Proper due diligence wasn't done at that time. They'd pushed about one shovel of dirt, found some contamination, IDEM shut it down. Spent a lot of time and money arguing with Union Carbide, Praxair, to come to a resolution, along with what IDEM will allow us to do. After significant testing and negotiation, ideally, we'd love to take that dirt pile out of there and cover it up and have 6 acres of developable land near Main Street. However, with what's in that site, it's just not feasible. It'd be millions of dollars because most of that would be considered hazardous waste that would have to be shipped to Michigan. So best case scenario we're able to get with IDEM is to basically, they will take off all the trees, all the brush, all the shrubs. They will cut down and smooth out as best they can to a gradable hill, if you will. Cover it with either grass that has to be mowed or native tall grasses and wildflowers that needs to be trimmed once a year. And then our compromise with Praxair was, hey, don't just put up split rail fence. We'll pay to put the fencing in and make it upgrade to match what's already there on Main Street. This is about the best we can do.
is this the big dirt hill that the kids always play on?
They shouldn't be playing on that dirt hill. You're going to have to clarify which large dirt hill in Speedway here is.
What's in
Not
it?
one by the highway.
Not the one by the highway, so, but yeah, so there will not be dirt coming off a site. It'll be resculpted. It'll be a much less grade than you see today.
What's in the soil that's contaminating it?
I could,
Heavy metals,
yes.
Union Carbide byproducts from the old day.
Back in the days where they just kind of threw it out the back door.
Yeah, it's kind of a slurry, but predominantly heavy metals.
There's the grow.
No.
Trees pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, so this'll improve the look of that site. Unfortunately, we won't have the opportunity to do anything better than improve the look of the site, which is an unfortunate situation. But this is kind of the compromise we came up with to say, well, we are going to eventually extend the B&O trail next to it. We'll have the nicer fence along there, and it'll look as good as it can look. It's just dictated by what IDEM's going to allow us to do.
So they're managing all the landscaping component of it.
Yeah, so once we had a small cash settlement, we're paying for the fence install, and then we are out of any further liability moving forward. So part of our settlement was we'll get this thing done, and then it's Praxair's responsibility moving forward from that point.
IDEM has very strict standards on what vegetation you can put on top of something like this, and so they're mandating grasses, grass-type things, prairie grass or mowable. That's about it.
No major root systems can be put into the cap.
No trees, nothing that goes deep into the ground.
Yeah. You're essentially putting a sealed cap over the top so you can't penetrate that cap.
Other questions?
No, I have none, thanks.
Anyone here to speak for or against the current petition? Seeing none, we'll hear from Ms. Blackham.
Chairperson Simonson, members of the board, staff is recommending approval of this, subject to substantial compliance with the site plan and the fence elevations that are filed dated July 26, 2019. Again, for all the reasons that's been discussed, staff doesn't believe that it would be appropriate to deny an 8-foot fence, and again, with the restrictions that IDEM has placed on this, that 8-foot fence, metal fence, would be appropriate. Staff obviously would like to see more landscaping, but that apparently is not going to be a possibility, and again, staff believes that in this situation, that both of these variances that they're requesting should be approved. We're recommending approval. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
This one's a little simpler than the previous one.
No, yeah, I would make a motion to vote on petition 2019 DVS 006.
I will go ahead and second that.
So we're voting on this with the substantial compliance with the site plan and fence elevations file dated July 26, 2019.
Petition 2019 DVS 006 is approved, 5-0.
Is there any other business to come before the board this evening?
I think everybody left.
Seeing none, our next scheduled meeting will be on October 2nd, 2019, 7 p.m. here at Town Hall. We are adjourned at 8:43.
Do you hit the gavel anymore? Like, you don't hit the gavel?